Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell Mindus, and welcome to Books. My dad, who has a PhD in English literature, thinks I should read because reading them improves my understanding of good literature, also known as Gwen aimlessly chatters about real literature. So, this next book has one of those non-stories that I think we all have. You know those stories where you say, there's a thing and this thing stood out to me for a while, but there's no actual story there. It's kind of like that episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where she says, ooh, dummies, give me the Wiggins. And everybody looks at her and she says, I saw a dummy. It gave me the wig. There was no story there. Um, we all have non-stories. This next book, oddly enough, is a bit of a non-story for me because it's a book that I thought about reading out of sheer curiosity and never bothered to until my father put it on this list. And the reason why was, well, because of the spine. Because, of course, when you've got a bookshelf full of books, all you can see of a book is the spine. That thing. Now look at that. That's an odd little handwritten brown thing. It looks either like an odd stylistic choice or like something that somebody had done because it was actually some sort of weird handwritten journal thing. Who knows? I was curious. Long story short, of course, one, I never read it, and two, it turns out that it's just that this was a library book that apparently they didn't want to get rid of, so they rebound it and hand wrote the title onto the spine so that, you could see what the spine was. And I will probably never know what the spine looked like, in no small part because I'm, not one to go looking up what the spines of books look like. I'm sure I could Google it eventually if I really wanted to, but I don't because that would be effort. The cover, unfortunately, is not all that interesting. The cover is actually much less interesting than the spine, and all that thing there is in fact the publisher's logo. This is just your standard cloth hardcover cover. And, doesn't really show anything, doesn't say anything. This is a book, by the way, that got dismissed from the City of York Public Library, and I suspect that by York Library, that this was most likely the City of York in Toronto, because there was a time when Toronto was several different cities, namely Toronto, North York, East York, and the City of York. And if you want to read about a lot of hysteria and upset over governmental things, you can look up the Toronto amalgamation. It was a heck of a time. Anyway, so let's go for the inside of the cover on the title page, just so that we have something to look at that actually tells us what this book is. The Prevalence of Witches by Aubrey Menon. This book, now that we've actually gotten onto the topic of the actual book, is humorous. I found it humorous, although probably not quite as hilarious as people of the period that it was written in might. The period of publication, of course, being 1947. But the thing is that this book is set in an invented section of India in the colonial period. And the idea is that it's almost a parody of colonial government. I would say that what best describes this book is the story of a bunch of very intelligent people who have found themselves out in the middle of the colonies and who have realized exactly how pointless it is trying to bring, in effect, British civilization to the locals. Because there's a certain futility to everything, because how they see the world is so different in its fundamentals from how the locals see the world that there's actually no way to bring the locals education and to make them educated Westerners. There's no way to bring them Western religion. There's no way to do a lot of things because they don't see things the same. The prevalence of witches, the title of that relates to the fact that this book, one of the ongoing lines of discussion in this book is witches. That is what the locals call witches. These are women who have some sort of supernatural power to cause disease or what have you, as witches are wont to do. And that the locals believe in witches, and they will drown women who they believe to be witches. And the problem is, of course, that because of the legal concept of mens rea, that is, a person's intent to do a bad thing, you can't really prosecute these people too much over the witch thing because they genuinely believe that these are evil women who are causing their children to drop dead. So you can, evil women who choose to die, who can choose to be dead or choose to be not dead, because it doesn't actually kill them because they are kind of immortal spirit people. Like, there's a whole thing. But you can't take it seriously because, of course, the whole of it is made up. It's the kind of thing where the author has undoubtedly riffed off of some of the local beliefs that he is aware of to build up a whole cloth of mostly, frequently, thoroughly ridiculous beliefs. And one of the things that you see in this book about how people see things so differently from each other is that for a brief moment in this book, we get the perspective of a local man who has been put in prison for murdering another man who was sleeping with his wife. He believed that that other man was a demon. That's why he killed him. And he's in prison for it. The problem is that, you get his perspective on him telling the story of what he did and why he did it to the officials, one of whom, for what I assume are ironic reasons, is known as Catullus. The thing is that he's telling his story, and throughout the telling of the story, he's saying these people were so delicate. He had to couch things, delicately and carefully, the way he would for children. And they asked him questions, why, like a child, because clearly they don't understand. Because, of course, they don't understand because their perspective as Englishmen is so different from his perspective as a native of Limbo. And yes, they call it Limbo. Aubrey Menon calls it Limbo, and it's obviously it's a joke that you're calling this place Limbo, that you're saying you are existing in a state of suspended animation of just, not of non-existence, because living in limbo is not like living in the real world. It's like living in some strange place where every Tuesday is Mutton Day, but it's not actually mutton, it's goat, but we call it Mutton Day because we're not having chicken. And it's utterly logical to say that it's called Mutton Day even though it's goat because we're not having chicken. That's a logical statement in Limbo. And so this whole book is extremely tongue-in-cheek, and it's filled with these people who they've given up. They're sort of, in aspects of what they do, they are going through the motions of attempting to bring civilization, of administering the colony, and all of these sorts of things. But at the same time, they're aware that they're not really administering anything, that the locals are doing whatever they'll do, and they don't have any actual control over it. They're just there. Now, and so it's an extremely deliberately parodic sort of story. The thing is, um, that of course this isn't what a lot of these places that were colonized were like. We all know the horror stories about residential schools, and we know all of the horrible things that happened in India and Africa, and so on and so on and so on. But the thing is that people do wind up, to some extent, when they live in a place like that, you wind up going native because you have to make adjustments. It's the same way that Christianity, which being a proselytizing religion, has to make adjustments for local traditions. That's part of why Christianity is fractured so much, because it's designed to change and to pick up local perspectives and values and everything else as it goes to different places. The way a Chinese Baptist church is not going to be the same as the way an American Baptist church is, or an English Baptist church, or a you name it Baptist church. Never mind the differences that you get once you start bringing in all of the variations to, the Coptic church and the Orthodox church and the upper and lower C of E and so on and so forth. But those changes are in no small part caused by the fact that you're adapting your religion to where you are. It's a thing that will naturally happen with a religion, but a proselytizing religion has to make concessions if they're going to bring people in under their giant umbrella. Well, these are people who are having to make concessions. They know that all the locals believe in witches, and so when they're trying to get this man out of prison, who he didn't commit murder, intended to commit murder. He was attempting to kill a demon that had possessed a man that was doing things with his wife. That was this man's perspective, and he can't be treated in the same way that you would treat somebody who said, I killed that other human being because I wanted to murder another human being. That's the concept of mens rea, legally speaking. The reason why self-defense doesn't get you thrown in prison, because accidentally shoving someone over a cliff when they're trying to kill you is not the same as going out and shooting somebody with the intent to kill that person. Well, in this case, they're trying to get this man out of prison, and they go to a lot of trouble to set up a whole series of events to, make miracles happen, to prove things to a judge. And all of these flexibilities and perspectives and everything else, it's kind of at the core of this book that everybody tries to be so horribly proper. And when Catalys's wife arrives at the end and gives them this talking to about how you can't give in, you have to go out here every day, and when you get up, you just have to say, I'm in Oxford. It's just a really hot day in Oxford. There is no difference. Don't bend. You can't not bend in a situation like this. And so this whole book is about bending without breaking, and it does it somewhat humorously. That being said, of course, if you're the kind of person who tends to get offended at Western humor about the colonial period, you should probably steer clear of this book, because you'll probably just find yourself vastly offended at everything in it. So, this is a book of its period. It's a book that was published in 1947, and there are large parts of it that are very much of 1947. So, if you can't take that kind of thing, you should probably just get out of this particular kitchen. And that is everything I have to say on this book, so I'll see you all next week.